I want to welcome you here, everyone, today. It's really a pleasure to see you all. And this gathering is the realization of a dream that I had, or maybe even a vision last spring. And it came out of some experiences I was having at the time with ChatGPT. I started playing around with it. I think almost everybody I knew was playing around with it at that time. And I was really excited about what it could do for me as a writer. I even hired it as a writing coach and wrote about what happened when I did that. But even as I was getting into all the things it could do for me and all the wonderful new experiences I was having with it, I felt a little bit of trepidation about it. And I started thinking that I was betting that other creative people, especially people who make a living from creativity, might share some of that apprehension. So I decided I would create a forum where I could talk to people about this issue and we could kind of come together. And that was what led to this event. I really also wanted to do it in partnership with someone. I, as the co-creator of the Birth Your Truest Story online writers community, I knew writers in that community who would be interested in this topic. But I wanted to reach a little beyond writers to other artists, musicians, filmmakers, basically anyone who makes their living through the words that they produce, the music they produce. And that's where Shuffle Collective came in. I have been involved with Shuffle since it was founded. I'm not going to remember exactly how long ago. I want to say right before the pandemic was when I got involved. And I would really like to extend my thanks to Shuffle, particularly to Tess Bliven, who is the mistress of logistics for this morning, and to Anuj, who helped kind of give us this definition of AI that we'll be talking about in a little bit, and really to the entire community that's been very supportive and participatory, and I've gotten to know some wonderful people through it. I really, I believe this, our strength and intelligence and creativity are only amplified when we come together as members of communities, whether it's Shuffle or Birth Your Truest Story. So I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists, although you will see as the event unfolds that this is not just going to be a typical panel event. And you'll experience that differently as we go through. But we have with us on our panel here, we have Genoa Bliven. And Genoa is the director of Human Design America and founder of the Human Design College. He spent a lot of time experimenting with making ChatGPT part of his creative work and process. It has surprised, delighted, and sometimes frustrated him in the way it responds. Laird Harrison has spent his life teaching sentences to behave themselves. I love that description of what he does. His essays, poetry, journalism, and fiction have been published widely, and he's covered AI for Medscape Medical News and used it in his reporting. He's taught writing at places like San Francisco State University, UC Berkeley Extension, and the Writers Grotto, where he recently taught a course called Use AI to Improve Your Writing. Harrison Kalman, yes, a relation to me, is a music producer and visual artist. He's closely followed ChatGPT since its public release last year, as well as keeping up with general developments in AI. And he and I regularly have conversations about AI and how we interact with it as artists. And finally, I'm glad she has arrived here. Mutale Nkonde is an AI policy advisor and founder of AI for the People, which launched by advocating for the introduction of the Algorithmic Accountability Act to the US House of Representatives. Her work sits at the intersection of race and technology, and she's fascinated by how the ideas that uphold systemic racism in the analog world are advanced and reproduced through what we design and deploy in the digital world. Finally, a quick word about me. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an author, an editor, a writing coach with a long ago background in journalism and corporate marketing communications. I recently retired from a second career as a birth doula, and my third career, which I am now in, has taken me back to fiction writing, really my first love, and editing, and to a wonderful new venture, the co-creation with my dear friend, Jennifer Brody, who is here in the audience today, of the Birth Your Truest Story online writers community, which is co-hosting this event with Shuffle. We will put links to both of these communities in the chat so you can find out more about them. And I know Jennifer and I have quite a few events coming up this fall that you might want to check out. And email that you can follow to keep up with everything. A few more little housekeeping details. I did mention we're recording this, and I want to emphasize again that you are an important part of this as the audience. So I do hope that you'll feel comfortable jumping in the chat. We're going to bring you in that way. And also perhaps if you feel like speaking, we'll have availability or times when you can speak verbally as well. I did leave out a very important introduction because I wanted it to serve as a segue into the event. I'm going to turn it over shortly to the person who will lead us through our time together, and that is Monica Cure. She's going to really run the show until we reconvene for a wrap up at the end. Monica is a Romanian-American poet, writer, translator, and dialogue specialist. I first met her last spring when she was in conversation for Ali Rigby's Telling Stories with Impact series. And I was drawn then to her really candid and inclusive style, and especially to her interest as a writer in exploring the unsaid in her poetry. I've always been interested in the unsaid. I was also fascinated to learn about her book, Picturing the Postcard, A New Media Crisis at the Turn of the Century, which refers to the turn of the last century. And it tells the story of how literature died one of its many deaths at the hands of the postcard, and uses this unlikely source to shed some light on our collective modern day obsession with new media. Monica is a former refugee who grew up in the Metro Detroit area, studied creative writing at Kenyon College. She has a BA in English, received her PhD from the University of Southern California in comparative literature, and is a two-time Fulbright Award winner. She's lent her skills as a dialogue specialist to organizations like the Goethe Institute, the LA Change Collab, the Romanian American Fulbright Commission, and the Museum of the Romanian Peasant. And I should mention, in case we didn't before, she is in Romania at the moment. She lives there. And in addition to these credentials, she has drawn on 15 years of experience teaching in academia to develop a unique method of dialogue, which she terms collective dialogue. And today, you are going to get to experience that this question-based philosophy yourself. It's aimed at facilitating real conversation among groups of people with contrasting perspectives. And I hope you will agree with me that it's a novel and fruitful way to bring together diverse voices to engage with really complex questions like this one. So please do join me in giving a very warm welcome as I turn things over to Monica.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Audrey. And it's just so exciting to have you and your vision coming true, because how often do we get to do this? Just really come together to talk about something that's important that we don't have the answer to it yet. And so collective dialogue, really, it's question-based in the sense of, you know, we have this overarching question that we collectively together are going to tackle. And by the end of our time together, we're going to come to our best working definition of our answer. But in the meantime, we're always going to be working together towards it, because not one of us has the answer. And our overarching question, just to give us a little bit more, you know, something to sink our teeth into, specifically, we're going to be talking about the question, what does AI mean for the future of creativity? And that could mean so many different things. Of course, is going to be what really matters to us in this virtual room. So again, what does AI mean for the future of creativity? And we're going to answer that by talking to each other, by engaging in real dialogue. And for that, I've come up with, you know, over my years of experience, really 3 guidelines, which I call myself the dialogue guide. I'm a facilitator, but I'm just going to be helping us to follow these 3 guidelines, which will actually help us to work together. So the first one is literally just keeping in mind that we want to respond to one another. So when someone says something, not to just leave it in the air, but to, if need be, clarify, ask another question, say whether you agree or disagree, or ask, well, what about it if it goes this way? So responding to one another is, understandably enough, the first rule of collective dialogue. The second one is that we keep interventions short. And an intervention could be sharing an idea, it could be asking a question, it could be just saying, that's great. we keep it to one idea. We keep it short. So my unit is one idea. And that usually, you know, when people make comments, they'll need to keep it to one idea. And I'll stop people if we're losing the thread. We need to come back to, let's find the heart of what you're saying here. So short interventions to one idea. And the third one is because collective dialogue works best when we're coming from all different fields, when we're coming from different cultural backgrounds. And so if there's anything that we think people in this group might not know in terms of a cultural reference, that we explain it. Of course, any one of us can ask, actually, I don't know that movie, or I don't know that book. So we can ask, but if we already think that might be not generally known, we can explain that reference. So respond to each other. Interventions are short and cultural references are explained. So with that, with those three, and that's something that we also hope that the audience will engage in, and we'll right now engage in terms of comments, but we'll have a surprise for you a little bit later with those three guidelines. And then to warm up before we start tackling our big question, I thought it'd be fun to do this warm up where each of us just say, how has AI come up in our lives in this past week or recently? And so, you know, I can just start with me as a translator. I often use ChatGPT to kind of play this game of taboo where I say it's an animal that's bigger than a pig but smaller than a bear, and then see what kind of options I get from ChatGPT. So that's one way I use it, that it comes up. And I know, Audrey, you were saying something earlier too.
Yeah, I just had a wonderful experience, which is, I'm in the process of revising a novel. And one of the things you have to do when you get to the end of your novel and are thinking about sending things out to agents and editors is write a synopsis of every chapter. And that is the most horrible thing that I have ever had to do. It's just, I love writing, you know, hundreds of pages, and I can't stand doing, you know, a synopsis. So I thought, oh, I'll ask ChatGPT. And I did. And within 10 seconds, it took what, you know, I used to labor and agonize over for hours, and gave me a synopsis of what I had just written. So that's what I've been doing recently. Any of our other panelists want to jump in?
Sure. When I was a kid, I remember hearing in Sunday school about Jacob wrestling with the angel all night. And I'm not sure that ChatGPT is an angel by any means. And the major thing is to remember that actually I'm a much better writer than ChatGPT is.
Very cool. What else is the first thing that comes to mind for the rest of our panelists, Mitali or Laird or Harrison?
Well, I recently was playing around with Hugging Face, which is another one of these programs like ChatGPT. And what made it interesting to me is that you can direct it to a particular website, and ChatGPT, at least the free version, won't go look at a website for you. If you give it a URL, it'll say, sorry, I can't do that. But Hugging Face has a button you can click, and if you turn it on, it will scan a website for you, so it could summarize the content of a website. And in this case, I asked it to summarize the content of a website about prompt engineering, because I was preparing for this on another panel and for the class that I teach, and wanted to learn about this concept that prompt engineering, that there's a better alternative to prompt engineering for making use of artificial intelligence.
Okay. Mitali, Harrison?
I'll go. And first, apologies for being late. I'm coming in from Brooklyn, New York. We had big storms yesterday, so I'm something of, I might move around in the course of the conversation just because we're doing clear up. But the way it came up for me, because this is the work that I do constantly, is to think about ways of making sure that AI can be deployed in ways that it can be used creatively while having safeguards. So it was the Congressional Black Caucus last week. I was in DC, And we were thinking about ways of, I was with a big social media company thinking about ways of protecting creators so that they can create videos and pictures that are funny and delightful, but are not going to be gamed by bad actors. And so the question is always, what affordances are you going to allow people versus how do we make sure that we are protecting the most vulnerable folk online?
Fantastic. And Laird, how does AI come up for you? Oh, sorry, Harrison. I knew I was going to do that. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. The first thing that comes to mind for me is ChatGPT, I think in general, has replaced Google as my first stop for, especially if I need to ask something formatted in a question, especially if it's fairly simple. You know, just from an efficiency perspective, it's so much easier than parsing through article after article and trying to figure out where exactly to go when I can just get an answer right then and there.
Fantastic. Okay, so our question, what does AI mean for the future of creativity? We've kind of heard a little bit kind of on the ground, practical, in our own lives, what's happening. We want to maybe start off with, depending on who we have in our audience, and maybe even among us in our panels, we're coming from different fields. So we actually want to maybe, when we say, what does AI mean for the future of creativity, actually define AI. And we'll see how long that takes us. It could be faster, it could be shorter. I might have lots of questions for those of you who are more experienced. But kind of to start off, AI, at least in one of the articles that Audrey shared with us and will be sharing with the entire audience, is AI is defined as the ability of a digital computer or computer-controlled robot to perform tasks commonly associated with intelligent beings. So that's kind of a blanket overall statement. But then we talked about, when we think about it in the context of creativity, we have Anuj who gave us the definition, further definition. Unlike traditional AI systems that follow predefined rules, generative AI is designed to generate novel and contextually relevant context by learning from enormous data sets and patterns in existing data. It does so by being trained on billions of pieces of information and uses its understanding of the patterns in that data to predict the answer to a prompt. Using vast computing power, it is able to do so in a manner that mimics human creativity. So let's, what we want to do, so we have this like amazing kind of comprehensive definition. We want to come to, what are we going to use as our working definition in this collective dialogue? What do we think about what we just heard? How do we put that in our own words? Who wants to give that a shot?
Well, I had, we were talking about this before the panel, and I had one slight quibble, which was using the word predict. I think it's not inaccurate, but it involves some unpacking. What does it mean to predict the response to a prompt? Because we usually think of a computer as answering a prompt rather than predicting the answer to a prompt. And I think what the person who wrote that was meaning was that the AI uses some sort of probability algorithm to estimate what the person who wrote the prompt most wants to hear. So okay. sort of like autofill, where when you're typing something on your smartphone, it tries to guess what the word is that you're trying to type.
So what you're saying, Harrison, sorry, Laird, I'm going to do that. No, I'm going to stop. That's the last time I'm doing it. I did it for each of you. Now it's done. So Laird, what you're saying is you want to look, or at least understand, you want us to understand, why would it be AI predicts versus AI answers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the reason why you would say AI predicts is because it's looking for what a human wants to know.
Yeah, so it doesn't know the answer, but it's trying to estimate based on the data that it's assimilated what the user wants to hear.
That's already really interesting. Who can put a definition in their own words? Are we ready for that, or do we have more questions about what generative AI?
That's what I was going to actually offer, that that's not an accurate definition of AI. That's speaking very, very specifically about generative AI. So I would want for that, for that to be labeled as generative. The second thing is I would offer just some type of simplification for people who, if they have short attention spans like me, after about 3 sentences, I have no idea what was said prior. So maybe something like generative AI systems are tools in which human beings and computers can engage in conversation, is probably my first sentence. And then my second sentence, and this would be my last sentence, is those conversations are driven by the human, but we cannot forget they are generated by machines. And I think that kind of just helps people imagine what's happening on the engineering side without needing a PhD from Stanford.
I love that. I love that, Mitali. Let's start with your first sentence, because I think that already gives us a lot to sink our teeth into. So I wrote it down, so I'm just going to repeat it. And maybe, Audrey, if you could put it in the chat, just so that we're able to kind of follow along. Generative AI systems are tools in which human beings and computers engage in conversation. Okay, let's get some thoughts, responses to that. And I love that it's short. I love that, we might need to nuance it a little bit, but I think those are really good bones to start with.
Can you repeat it for me, because I can't type quite that fast? Tools in which, yes.
Tools in which human beings and computers engage in conversation.
Got it.
What do we like about it? What do we think maybe we need to add or have questions about?
Well, the first thing that occurs to me is that there were computer programs back in the 70s that could engage in conversation, but they worked on a sort of deterministic algorithm. In other words, the programmer had programmed into the program, if it saw certain strings of words, then it would provide a certain type of response. There was one called ELIZA that was meant to sort of simulate a psychotherapist, and so it would say, how are you feeling? And you would say, oh, I'm feeling a little depressed, and it would say, what makes you feel that way? But it wasn't relying on a large repository of data from which to draw its responses. It was just an algorithm, as I said. So to say that generative AI is a tool in which human beings and computers engage in conversation is true, but it doesn't capture what makes generative AI different from the type of AI or even simpler computer systems
Laird,
that are not AI.
I want to respond to, I think, a really important point that you're making, in that earlier you used the word deterministic. I think that was the word that you used. In the previous programs, there's a kind of determinism by the programmer. Programmer determined, it seems like, a lot. Whereas what I'm kind of sensing, and I think we all need to maybe understand this a little better, in what way then does generative AI have more independence? And I see that in kind of Mitali's use of the word conversation. So what exactly, as you were just putting the question, Laird, what is the difference? I mean, and maybe in looking at it in terms of deterministic versus independent.
So deterministic in the sense that the programmer has determined what the computer will do in response to a certain input. Whereas with generative AI, the programmer doesn't know how the program is going to respond. The computer has essentially created its own algorithms. It has looked for patterns in the data, and then it's created probabilities for what a user might want. Randomization, so it doesn't consistently provide the same response to the same prompt. And then on top of that, it's trained on interacting with human beings who say, oh, this was a good response, that was a bad response. So it's added that to the rules that it's created for itself. But the programmer doesn't know what those rules are.
Okay.
I think if I could add an important distinction here. So, in all the technical words that come up, I think that machine learning is a really important one, because I would say with our current definition, both the early forms of AI that you described, or the early chat programs, and what we're currently dealing with ChatGPT, I think those are both forms of AI, but the key difference being machine learning, and that with ChatGPT, the program is being formed kind of with some level of independence, but I do think that those initial sorts of chat programs are still kind of fundamentally the same thing, in terms of taking an input and processing it and returning something to the user.
I was going to just bring in something that we have a couple of audience members commenting on, which I think is important. And it's a discomfort with having the word conversation in the definition, because that kind of presumes a sort of mental process that generative AI doesn't necessarily possess. So there's a little discomfort there from the human beings on the side of the equation with that part of the definition.
Polly, what do you think? Tell us a little bit more. Why are you choosing the word conversation?
Because I deal with non-experts 100% of the time. So we do get to machine learning, and we do get to the technicalities, and we do get to the histography. But to invite people into the subject matter, the idea that you can give a prompt to a chatbot and it can make recommendations to you is so much, it's such an advancement in terms of the way large language models have been used up until history, in terms of being commercialized up until this point. The conversation is a very, very easy entry point from which you can build. I think my discomfort with the responses I've heard so far is that I don't know the knowledge that I am being faced with within this context. And so they just seem so far ahead and so dry and so uninspiring that it makes me wonder how and when are we going to get to the creativity part? So that would be my only thing, number one. And number two, none of the definitions are speaking to where I come in at, which is really responsible AI. So the nice thing about conversation is that it gets us to actually it sets you up to talking about the data set, the construction of the data set, whose language is being used, what norms does that set up, what journeys does that potentially take us on. So that's where I would come from.
Yeah, so I think that, we right now are using what you have as our working definition. And unless I haven't actually heard a change in language, we can change that. If we have a better word better word, if we agree on a different word than conversation, which, you know, which always obviously clearly open to for the purposes of our dialogue, we can do that. So again, generative AI systems are tools in which human beings and computers engage in conversation. I see, you know, if we want to change a little bit the word conversation to reflect what we've been saying so far, we can. If we want to maybe say tools for what or by who, that's an interesting node for exploration. So we are, I don't know, I think this could actually be a good moment to have our audience, if they want to jump in and tweak the definition. So we have it written there in the chat. And if we want someone, you know, anyone at this point can jump in. And again, the only thing is the 3 rules of collective dialogue is responding to what we're just talking about, which is our definition, our working definition of generative AI, keeping it to one idea. And if there's anything cultural, I think we'll also let you know. So who would like to speak? Well,
yes. Sure. So I don't know if any of the folks who have jumped in the chat might want to come forward and actually have a little more conversation about that. We have Mary Kate, Lasita, and Ina. So if any of you want to, or anybody else is welcome to, you know, you can raise your virtual hand and we can invite.
Yeah, and just, you know, just share it so it's out there. We're then, you know, able to incorporate it, but we'll just kind of have you guys share the one thought, and you can just put it out there. You don't have to elaborate, but whatever it is that you feel like you'd like to change in our definition or suggest for a definition.
And if we have no takers, we can
go with. I'd like to address something that I'm perceiving in the comments in the chat, which is, I think that a lot of people are feeling a lot of anxiety about these generative AI tools and fear and anger about them because of the feeling that these programs are going to take away something that we have or replace something that we're doing. And so what I'm reading in some of these chat comments is, well, don't call it a conversation because that sounds like something pleasant that would happen between human beings, and really, you know, what these generative AI models are doing is not something pleasant or agreeable. So I just wanted to kind of respond to that emotion, because I think on some level, many of us, maybe all of us, share that sense of fear and anxiety about these programs and what they might do, because they are likely to change a lot about our way of life.
I like that. And I think, yeah, we get a lot of information. We can really use our emotions as a way of knowing. And I think you're absolutely right, Laird. So from that, actually, what came to my mind is, what if we said in which computers respond to humans? So generative AI systems are tools in which computers respond to humans. And maybe more is missing there, but maybe that solves part of it.
Well, we can't help but get into the issue of subjectivity in relationship with machines. We tend to anthropomorphize them and turn them into human beings in our imagination. And yet, the truth is that so far, ChatGPT, as an example, is pretty predictable as to what we'll do. And, you know, essentially, at least in terms of my experience, I'm in a position of manipulating that machine to do what I want it to do. And that's hardly equivalent in any way to a human relationship. And it's pretty important not to confuse the kind of relationship that you can have with a machine. I mean, a lot of people have relationships with machines. Some people really love their cars. People love computers. But it's not a human relationship. It can't do the same thing that a human being can do. I mean, there's so much outside of the realm In fact, 99% of everything is outside of the realm of what something like ChatGPT can do. And the exciting thing about it is when it surprises you, which is kind of unusual. That's where you get to learn something pretty exciting from GPT.
Maybe we want to add a little bit to the ending of the definition, because I think
can I just go in that there was a second sentence to the definition that did say that we cannot forget that these are machines. Right. Because I think to Genoa's point, am I saying your name correctly?
It's Genoa, but however.
To Genoa. No, I would prefer to say it correctly. To Genoa's point, this anthropomorphosis is part of the danger and is part of the anxiety, which is why even though it feels like you are in a conversation, to Harrison's point, this is based system that is using algorithmic drivers to come to its determinations. And I would push back on my colleague who said we shouldn't think about predicting, because with our current technology, that's what literally is happening. The machine is predicting the best suited response to your prompt. However, that's not necessarily the definition I would go into. My instinct is always go in with the definition that invites as many people to the party so that we can build our definitions and language together. So I think it would be, we definitely have to not forget that these are not human beings. That has to be part of the definition also.
Yeah, so I think what we have, it's great. We're finding it. I think that's a really important point, and I think our definition makes it. I am wondering if we want to continue something, because already a couple times the idea of surprise has come up in terms of talking about generative AI. So right now we have generative AI systems are tools in which computers respond to humans, and then maybe something in surprising ways. I mean, what would we want to add something there about this element of surprise?
Do we want to hear from our one raised hand audience member? Ina, that would be great. Maybe she has something to say about surprise.
No, I'm sorry. We've moved on. So I will
not. Okay. I'm sorry.
I should get my hand back.
You were figuring that out. All right. Never mind. Back to surprise.
Well, I mean, the people who are developing AI are keeping a very sharp eye out for when it does unexpected things. I mean, that's what freaks them out, and it does do unexpected things.
I mean, I think that's a key distinction between generative AI and the type of AI and other types of computer programs that came before, is that the programmers don't know what it's going to do. So there isn't a algorithm that the human being who created it or anybody else can say, this is how it works. They know how it started off, but they don't know what path it took after it started.
And I will say too, it's interesting because this other kind of tension that came up, if we want to say, it responds to humans in ways that I would add can surprise us, because in some ways it seems the idea behind it is it actually answers, like it actually does what we want it to, what we think it should. It's trying to predict what we need. So the fact that there's also this element of surprise is interesting. Go ahead, Mitali.
Can I just push back a little bit on the surprise thing, which is also referred to as hallucination? There is a huge amount of social science that helps us at least anticipate some of the surprises that we'll see. So, for example, in my own work, looking at online speech, we'll find that the earliest people to create any type of language corpus on the internet were actually the Aryan nation, who became social networkers in the 1980s through a program called LibertyNet. So when we are building any type of language model, or when we're thinking about the different probabilities that can come up in online speech specifically, one of the guardrails that happens at the development phase is that we're always looking to make sure that we don't end up with a surprise or a hallucination, depending on the terminology that you use, that takes us back to that base language corpus. And there was a really famous article in the New York Times when ChatGPT first released, and they seemed really, really surprised that ChatGPT kind of went rogue and started to make statements that would have, if it were a human, which is why we cannot pretend that these technologies are human, make you assume that ChatGPT was a Nazi, and it really wasn't. It was just responding to the way that the internet has been built over the last 40 years in terms of speech. So the one idea that I'm offering is that these are not surprises. These are the constructions of the internet that we have built and that we are continuing to build.
Right. So it responds in ways that might be surprising to maybe someone in a moment, but it's built on what exists out there, what it's been fed.
That's what I was going to point out, that it may be surprising on an individual level, but to the people who are developing the systems, there should be a bigger perspective that allows it to be less surprising.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So far then, we still have generative AI systems are tools in which computers respond to humans. Are we happy with that? Do we feel like we want something a little bit more specific for generative AI or not?
I think that's good. I think it, moving there to that definition from including conversation is also good, because it leaves open space for other non-text types of generative AI. So, whether it's image generation or any other sorts of technology.
Yeah, great point, Harrison. Okay, so we have that. And now, we have a hand up. Yes. We want to give a little bit time for people to respond where they are. As we're moving from now, we know we're on the same page about our definition of AI. We're going to the creativity part. What does AI then mean for the future of creativity? Yes, go ahead.
I wanted to read from some of what people have been contributing in the chat. So we had Ina, who said she was uncomfortable with calling this conversation because it presumes a kind of interior experience of both participants, like a mental process. Generative AI doesn't have that yet. I wrote that I thought that conversation left out the aspect of where ChatGPT would create writing that doesn't ask me any questions, even if I could correct it or add ideas if I need to. Mary Kate Jordan wrote, all the talk seems to assume that along with being helpful, AI is relatively benign, which isn't necessarily so. Can summarize website contents, whose what permissions, trained on billions of pieces of data, whose what permissions. As a writer right now, I stand with the actors still on strike. I suggested the words
can I actually
one idea at a time. That's why I felt like
one idea, but actually you've given me a great idea, which is actually to have just a couple minutes, people to say one fear that they have from AI, because I think the comments that you've been reading are actually people's fears, and I think that's important to get on the table. So let's just kind of spend just a couple minutes as rapid fire as we can. You can put it in the chat, but we'd love to hear people's voices. You don't have to turn on your cameras, but what is one fear you have about AI in one sentence? Generative AI.
I can start, because my first fear on starting to do some generation is that, why should I ever write another book again? Why should I ever write a novel? Because AI can generate novels and I'll be out of a job.
Okay. What else?
Hi, this is Tatiana. I think for me, the first thing that I think is AI will basically change narrative, right? And it will take out the depth of what humans can like, or what humans actually bring in when we do writing. Because when we're writing, we're bringing in like all the human history within us. You're bringing in the emotional cues, and I've noticed a lot of generative AI misses that aspect. It's just because it's a knowledge base and they have access to the knowledge, you still miss the cues of the context because they don't have that lived experience to even be able to understand the nuances that exist in different.
Yeah, Tatiana, that's exactly, I think, my fear. You talked about it, that AI, your fear is that AI will take the depth out of narrative. And for me, I'm afraid that people will get so used to reading AI text that is then a sort of normal thing, that these flat texts are what is accepted as normal, because it's not for me in that way. Yeah. And I see a hand, I see a couple of hands.
Sheila, hello. My fear is that AI is going to replace the human inquisitive interaction with another person. It's almost like in the old days, it was doing a survey to get input from people versus doing online, doing in-person or at least visual interviewing, so that you can respond and say, I need more information, I need more depth. Can you explain why something is true? And you lose that if AI is giving you the information because it's more flat. It doesn't have that human emotion.
Thank you, Sheila. And I see Ina and then Mary. That's good. And then Barbara, those three.
I think Barbara's had her hand up for quite a while.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see. Yeah, so Barbara, go first. Thank you.
I have worked with large language models before, and what I actually fear all of the fear about AI, because I feel like there are a lot of problems like formulaic content and the labor issues and lack of good composition teaching and all of these things that have been around for a long time that is now being scapegoated onto AI and therefore not being addressed.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. When I wrote Picturing the Postcard, so many of the issues with AI now actually happened with the postcard, if you can believe it. So I absolutely agree. These things are cyclical and not solved. Yes. Now, Mary, whoever wants to go first.
If I could add one more thing to that, I think I would absolutely agree. Kind of the general fear, I'm a little bit afraid of the general fear that people have of AI. And I think that, yeah, like, the impulse to scapegoat certain issues onto the AI boogeyman, so to speak, kind of, can detract from really what's going on. And like we were talking about earlier, the AI is working from a data set. And so often if there are problems in the data set, if there are biases and stuff like that, it will, give us something that has problems and biases. And if we blame it on the technology, I think that kind of misses the mark on what's going wrong. So
and can absolve us as humans of bias. Yeah, great. Mary and Ina, whoever wants to go first.
I'll go ahead and go. I think it's related to Harrison's point. I have concerns about, and it's the reason I don't like talking about this as a conversation, because it lets people forget that there's something behind the AI, that the data is coming from other human beings. So if you get that situation with, the AI talking like a Nazi, I think it's really important, especially for people who are maybe less empowered in society, to really be aware that what's going on here is that some human is responsible for this.
Yeah, the lack of responsibility,
especially for large organizations that need to be held accountable for problems that come up.
Great. And Mary.
Thank you. I fear the ease at widely disseminating misinformation. There's great potential it as a tool, as a system, to get a lot of misinformation that would be harmful. Thanks.
One of the things we want to do at this point, we talked about if any of you actually want to join us here. So we want to make this panel, people have thought about AI, but we'd actually love someone to come and dialogue with us as well as we go into this next phase. So is there anyone who would like, no one has to, but if somebody wants to, Audrey, if you could see anyone interested?
Yeah, I mean, really the difference is, kind of joining us, being spotlighted for all. And I think you can see we're a very gentle and generous group. And Monica is doing a fantastic job of guiding us and helping us respond to each other. So it might be a really fun opportunity if you felt like being a panelist for the next little bit. And again, if not, we can continue to represent you through the chat. And so. Right.
While we're working on that, maybe I'd like to say that my greatest fear about, maybe in general, is pretense. That ChatGPT is pretending that it's a human being. Mm-hmm. It's pretending that it knows what you want. And but the problem isn't that the machine is pretending. I think that the problem is the amount that human beings pretend to be something other than what they are or who they are. And that bothers me because the more we pretend and the more we anthropomorphize AI, we enter into the world of total pretense. That's really not a good place to be. And then, of course, there's another issue, which I know is one idea at a time, but I'm going to disobey that rule, which is what do we do with it, and how useful can it be for us to be more sincere, to be more real as people, to be more honest? Because whenever you're using GPT, you're combating pretense. You're using pretense to combat pretense. You're learning from a machine that's pretending it's human. It isn't. Yes, there are human beings behind it for sure, and that's really spooky, actually. That's really kind of creepy. So it all adds up to who are we, and what do we have to say, and what are we going to do with this, and how do we form it? How do we make it what we need it to be? And of course, then there's other fears as well.
No, this is good. So we've gotten all these fears out on the table. And I think it's important to do that because it will inform this next part, which is what does generative AI mean for the future of creativity? So that's, now that we have our definition, we have our fears, can we also think about what is the potential? And can we find the root of that potential? And in the same way we did that for the definition of AI, are we able to come to a common understanding of maybe not just what is the potential for the negative potential for human creativity? What is the positive potential? Because already in our discussion, it seems like humans are continuing to be creative in the questions that they're asking AI, in the uses of AI. Yes, let's keep going in that vein. So who would like to continue?
I was just going to ask if I thought we wanted to, I think you had mentioned something about perhaps even spending a few minutes on creativity itself, because I feel Absolutely. Like, we probably could have a whole nother morning's discussion on that, but it might be useful because it actually what you just said reminded me that, there's different ways of, because thinking about creativity, I'm thinking of it from, my perspective as a writer, and, I'm doing creative writing and narrative. And then you were saying, you made me think, well, there's creativity in terms of like how you design the system and, the sort of all these other realms of creativity. So I think that would be helpful.
Fantastic. Yeah, we can start there too. How are we using the word creativity? Or how do we want to, because again, this is our dialogue. We can choose. again, feel free to use the chat.
Well, it's interesting to use AI detectors on your own writing and put in GPT's writing and see whether it can tell the difference and whether it will actually recognize AI generated text. And it does. But the thing that makes the difference, it seems, is that human beings are unpredictable. And you could almost link up to a definition of creativity in that perspective, that we can do the unpredictable. We can confront the unknown.
I think that's a really interesting word because, again, predictability, surprise, unpredictability keeps coming up in our dialogue. And I think there could be something in that if we wanted to look at creativity in terms of unpredictability. Audrey?
Can I just throw out, I'm not very good at coming up with things on the spot, but I tried to come up with some words that we can maybe then do what we did with the generative AI. I'm not attached to these whatsoever. Creativity is the ability to make something new and surprising based on one's experience and response to the world.
One more time.
I'll put it in the chat too. Creativity is the ability to make something new and surprising based on one's experience and response to the world.
Can I build on that slightly, Audrey? I love that, by the way. That's made me very creative and enabled me to contribute. Could we also add some type of idea that gets us to this element of surprise that we talked about in the last definition? Because I wonder if creativity, that ability to make something new and surprising, also extends our worldview somehow. That's horrible language, and it needs to be workshopped. But it's not just surprising; it can be completely unexpected, new. I don't have the right words. But expansive. I'm thinking of developing story worlds. That's where my mind is. I just don't have the language.
You mean in terms of being it's not just like a thing, like a small thing. It's you're able to like see things as a whole. Is that what you're meaning to say?
Kind of in a different piece of work, I've had to just I've put forward Octavia Butler to a design team because they're thinking of a new technology. And the reason that I gave them Octavia Butler is that they had just never been exposed to it before. So it's bringing them into this new story. Yeah, paradigm shifting. Thank you. That's what I was thinking about. I just couldn't.
Yeah.
Would you suggest replacing the word surprising with paradigm shifting, or somehow adding?
Maybe adding for now, and other folk can help us make it whatever it's going to be.
You know, I think that creativity, maybe it's something in the make something. Maybe that's you want to get more precise about the make something, because creativity, it can be just that. You know, it's not always like a physical product. It's not always, it can be creating
like a shift.
That's a pretty high bar for creativity. I don't know if I'm creative now. If I change everyone's paradigm.
Well, also the new and surprising part, I just feel like sometimes creativity is routine, so it might not feel new or surprising, if that makes sense. It's creating something. Yes.
You know, I feel like in that, I like that too, Mary. I feel like there's maybe something missing that's about an individual here, in the sense of it's this, when we talk about creativity, you know, we talk about the individual taking this whole thing that's the world, that's our response to the world, that's, you know, the sum of our interactions, even with other people, with our culture. And it is, at least when I think about creativity, in the way that we use it. It's an individual response. That seems to be important to me in a way that it differentiates, because I'm actually seeing, sorry. No, go ahead, and I'll save that thought. Keep going. Yes.
I was just going to say, do we want to say, instead of the ability, do we want to define it as an act? Creativity is an act, is an act that results in something?
No, I like ability.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else?
Okay.
Well, at the same time, for synergy or to be able to evolve, have an evolving consensus, all the people involved need to be able to just enter that process as themselves, to be their unique person. And if you don't have people standing up for who they are or being who they are, then you can't actually have a synergetic, evolving consensus. So only people can do that, because we're unique. Every person's unique.
Thank you. Jenua, that's, I think, where I was kind of going with my individual comment, because in some ways I'm, going to play devil's advocate just to put it out there and like prey on our worst fears. The definition that Audrey gave us in many ways does mimic the way that we were talking about generative AI, in that, we're getting data in from the world, from our experiences, and we're responding. Remember our definition, we have computers responding to humans. But when we have this individual piece, and this sort of, I don't have it completely worked out, but there's something I think that I'm hearing what you're saying, Jenua, and what I'm feeling, that we're looking for the difference being an individual and the uniqueness of the human individual.
Can I add to that something that I've arrived at, which I think is related, and that is, I said my biggest fear was, I'll be replaced by some machine writing a novel. And then I said, but I am part of the creative process. For me is actually the experience of being creative, like the joy that I take in being creative, and the computer cannot have that experience for me. Like only I can have that experience. So therefore, by definition, a computer cannot experience to be creative in the way that I am. So I don't know, it feels like this is kind of related to what you were talking about of the individual.
Interesting. Tatiana, I see your, I don't know, I know I'm not seeing everyone, but I am seeing Tatiana, so I do want to just give you space to
I think for me what's also coming up is, when I think of creativity, I think of like a sort of like process of alchemy, because a lot of times you're always like wrestling with a thought or a feeling, right, and trying to work your way through it, and I know creativity somebody said doesn't always have to be original, because it's true, because it's the interaction of everything, something else that somebody sparked in you that you saw, and like taking all that and alchemizing it into something new. So it might be the same thing, but it's just never been said or processed out the same way. And again, AI can't do that.
Yeah, so it's not simply, creativity isn't, just selecting an answer. It takes what has been given and completely changes its form. You'll eat a bologna sandwich, and then like the next day it'll come out completely different in a poem. You'll have completely changed that experience.
I hope I'm not jumping ahead, but I found that the way AI can help me in my creativity is when I react against it. I think it's most useful in sort of getting you past the fear of the blank page. So, just where do I start on this topic? And like I've asked ChatGPT to write a lesson plan for me, and so it'll very quickly, I'll give it some parameters. It'll very quickly come up with a lesson plan, and then I'll look at that and I'll say, well, that's not it at all. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this instead, and I'm going to change this. And pretty soon I have a lesson plan. It doesn't look anything like what ChatGPT came up with, but it sort of launched me into getting going.
Yeah, I have to say I use that in similar ways when I translate. When I use it for translating, and I actually get a lot of joy out of be like, that's not right. Like that's not even close to being the thing that I need. But it has given me this joy in this moment of seeing, yeah, now my answer is completely different, and I never tell it. Like my list and ChatGPT is a bunch of random questions about things. I'm like, AI could never figure out what these all have in common. But Harrison, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just gonna add on. I think that really the kind of the crux of what separates AI's ability to generate something from genuine creativity, a part of it, or the main part of it, is that it maps onto a real human experience. And so I think I worry a little bit because I see the response from a lot of people kind of based on where ChatGPT is right now, but it's certainly going to only get better, and at some point I think it will be much more convincing at kind of creating this I guess you could say faux creativity. And so yeah, I think the important part is that like you were saying with the eating a bologna sandwich, you're not just processing that, but you're processing that with the context of your entire human experience and entire life. And you can fake that, but and maybe people can tell, maybe people can't, sort of.
Yeah, that's really good. And that actually makes me think of what Mutale was saying about this kind of like total thing, this paradigm, the ability to see the big picture thing. And it also is reminding me, same, when I translate, I know that my ability to be a translator is the sum of all of my cultural knowledge, including that bologna sandwich that I ate, including, everything that I've acquired in my unique life experience that is not reproducible as a data set.
I just came up with another modification to the definition based on what I've just been hearing about alchemy and humanness. And again, I don't know that this is quite right. It might be a little vague. So creativity is the ability to make an alchemical transformation based on human experience, resulting in something new, surprising, and paradigm shifting.
What do you mean by alchemical?
I'm not sure. So I think we have to work on that. It was kind of a placeholder shorthand for, like, I think I feel what it is, but I don't know. So I welcome input on that.
But I mean, already in that, I found it really interesting that you'd said creativity is based on human experience. And that, I mean, it seems circular, but there is something that rings really true in that. That creativity is based on human experience.
I don't know, maybe it's just a way to get out of, ultimately having to say that computers and machines can be creative, but it feels right.
Well, if we say that creativity is based on human experiences, then AI could be creative only insofar as it takes portions or data sets of human experience. So it will never have that totalizing human experiences that each individual human inherently has, the sum total of their experiences in themselves.
Well, and ChatGPT is just, now it's part of our story. It's part of what gets inputted into us. And it's one of the things that gets inputted into us. And it's pretty important to maintain some sense of humor in all of this, I think, even though the topic is very, very serious. It's like, I love the metaphor of the bologna sandwich. That's perfect for description of ChatGPT. It's just a bologna sandwich, part of, we're eating a bologna sandwich, and it's just part of our story. And nobody's going to make that into what we need it to be except us. Who we could blame it for a whole bunch of stuff, or blame the people who made it, demonize them, but nobody's going to deal with this other than us, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
Together.
Yeah, I see. I do see a comment. Sometimes I am able to look over. I really like what Potter Wickware just said. AI's derivative, human experience is original.
Yeah.
So I like what we've been kind of saying around creativity as human experience being central to our definition of creativity, where it is generated from the sum total of human experience. And I think that's something that we had come up as well. So if we, have a sense of what AI is, if we're, at least for our purposes, talking about human creativity in this sense of the sum total of the human experiences of an individual, then being transformed, what does AI then mean for the future of creativity?
I think Joel had his hand up, or their hand up for a bit. Do you still want to say something, Joel?
Yeah, thank you. I kind of put my hand down because I thought maybe things had moved in a different direction, but I realized this does still apply. It came to me as we were talking about the fears related to AI, and I happened to, at that moment, be reading an article in the paper, a physical paper, about a city council that has instituted a series of standards, quote unquote, design standards, requiring any developer to use one of 6 different architectural styles for their buildings. And what occurred to me that's important, that's just different from everything we're talking about with AI, is that someone came up with that idea to do that. And the fact that that person came up with that idea and then put it in front of city council, maybe it's my inexperience with all of this, but I don't believe that AI could do something like that at all. And my fear would be that at some point it can come up out of whole cloth. It could come up with ideas that nobody had asked it to have, and that then would start to generate new directions of thinking that could be dangerous. That was it.
Well, in an interview of the person who started ChatGPT, he's predicting a future where there'll be massive AI machines, and then they will be orbited by thousands of other AI machines that keep an eye on what it's doing and detecting where it's going rogue. Well, that's a creepy thought. It's just going like, who am I listening to? And yet I feel that he's in a position to kind of be able to see the direction that this is going and the kind of precautions that will need to be taken in the future, because human beings won't be able to keep up with what AI can do. It just can do it so fast.
But what is the it? It's something that we as humans have wanted it to do, right?
Well, the problem is that it creates its own algorithms. It creates its own rules of the game, and those rules are constantly morphing, and they're happening so quickly that it would take other AI machines to keep up with it. That's what he was saying. And they can be prompted to recognize when AI is doing things that it was never intended to do. And then I don't know what you do about that, but that's what he's thinking about. So I don't think the fears about it are unfounded by any means in terms of where it can go in the future. What relevance that has to us now as creatives, that's another story, because we're using it now for what it can do now for our creative process.
And I think it's really important to remember in our definition, and that's why I'm bringing us back to it. We had talked about generative AI systems being tools, and I think when it stops being a tool, we're already in a maybe different kind of conversation. If these things are now automated, where we're not making the decisions, that's, I think, something maybe different.
It's sort of the hammer says, oh, now I'm going to go and hammer together this house, and I'm going to, it's like, wait a minute, I didn't tell you to make that house. You're just a hammer.
I do think in my work, the vision is for a hybrid reality for creativity. So some things that are low level, low stakes are not going to interfere with people's ability to work or IP. Maybe those things become automated, and those are seen as taking away. I know in my research world, I love using citation tools because that takes away a lot of grunt work from me so that I can actually do the learning and synthesizing and creating of knowledge. And then they're going to be, and those systems are probably going to be more automated, and the systems that act more like tools. The best analogy I can think of is Adobe. This isn't an AI system, but Adobe touches up pictures, right? It doesn't take the pictures. It doesn't compose the shot. It doesn't, I think there were some really great comments made in our fear section around narrative and the soul of storytelling, right? So, in the world that we're trying to create from a regulatory perspective, that the soul of the creation wants to be maintained with the tool, much in the same way we use forks when we eat. Forks don't create meals, right? We create meals. But the tool of AI helps to enhance that process in some way.
Yeah, and I think that in our definition of creativity, and the human being central to our definition, that's where the tool then serves the creativity. The tool is for the human. I think our earlier fear, several of you mentioned about the scapegoating of AI. It's actually scapegoating the fact that we as humans often don't value other humans. I think that is the main problem that will keep coming up with AI. It's actually us not valuing other humans.
And I also think that it's a reframe, to your point, Monica. I don't know that people are I don't know of anybody in my field that could honestly be credible and say that a technology is racist when it's a technology, it's a tool, and it's the engineering, data sets, other things. So maybe there is some, with that particular fear, I would encourage people to reframe and think of these being techno-social tools. So everything that we have in society is going to exist in tools that we create for society. So getting back to that tool analogy, and not the AI is good, bad, or indifferent. It's a tool.
Oh, good. Ina, I see that you have your hand raised.
Sorry, I got briefly distracted by home things. I think one of my concerns here is that in talking about it as a tool, it feels really optimistic. And I'm thinking about the Writers Guild strike that's only just ended. And yes, this time they got concessions, but how much are we going to be able to keep doing that? It would be great if this was just a tool and it took out the grunt work, but it looks like a lot of times the devaluation of creativity means that people in big business are going to use and they're already trying to use these tools to do the fun stuff and leave the grunt work to the embodied people, the people with bodies, which currently generative AI does not have.
Can I respond to that? Because that's use case. That's human decision making. That's not a tool cannot decide how it's going to be used. And even the idea that it's optimistic, fire is a tool for cooking. I don't know that that's an optimistic or a pessimistic statement. It just is. So I think as much as we can maybe just strip away some of the emotion, that is going to potentially enable us to think of creative and great ways to use these tools. Not that the emotion isn't valuable. And we are speaking about creativity, where I think emotion plays a role in creativity, but that is just something that I could maybe just offer. And I do agree, there does need to be regulation and there do need to be demands. Otherwise, capitalism, which is what I think is being described, is going to take over. And it is definitely way cheaper to use a system to do the work of humans, because systems don't need social support. And so that's part.
Basically, I would say, I mean, there's absolutely so much room for anger and rage, but it's not at AI. It's at other humans who are exploiting humans. And knowing that creativity, because it's a rare commodity in that each individual has their own unique contribution. And if we say, no, we're not going to value that and we don't have to pay you, that's harmful to us as humans. Absolutely. And there's so much room for anger at that and regulation.
It's like Tatiana has her hand raised.
Yes. And I think just to kind of add on what Mutale was saying, what I'm also hearing is all this fears that we have around AI is actually an invitation for us to come together and continue to have a dialogue, right? It's like, hey, instead of just being angry for being angry's sake, hey, can this call us back to the table to have discussions? Because AI is only pulling from, it's basically being prescriptive of the things that are already in society. And so if we're seeing that, like we're seeing the biases coming up in AI, that means, can we sit down and dialogue? Because AI is only pulling what's already there, right? And so something that Monica had said earlier is, so instead of scapegoating it and like, hey, we're not going to address it, this is the AI's fault, it's like, yo, no, this is actually us. It's basically being a mirror of what's already inside us. So let's come together and talk. And that's how we are going to continue to be collectively participate in being the gatekeepers of this AI as a tool. Like, we'll have to take the responsibility of, we can't just like assign that to the technocrats and like it's up to them to fix it. We're the ones who are using the tools, so we cannot yield our power to them and just be like victims, like, oh, it's happening to us. Like, no, this is showing up what's inside us already that we haven't talked about and we haven't dealt with.
Yeah, and I think we have that response, and I like that. I love that idea of an invitation. I think that is absolutely so valuable. And for me, part of that invitation that's just kind of coming up in our conversation is to value the human and then use these tools for that, for valuing the human element in creativity, because we've just decided we can't even talk about creativity without that human, the sum total of a human's experience, of an individual human's experience being what we're talking about.
I want to respond to the idea that this is a tool that we control, because I think that we human beings are controlling it right now, but the possibility that it could evolve in a direction where we can't control it is real. And it's not just sort of humanities type people like us who have that concern. I've seen surveys of AI engineers where they said that the possibility of AI destroying humanity was something like 10% on average. That to me is pretty frightening. And
Laird, can I ask you, I mean, just for those of us who maybe are not as familiar with that viewpoint, can you walk us through really quickly what is a kind of, you know, scenario in which that could happen? I mean, what would need to happen? What steps would have to happen first before AI could pose a threat to humanity, beyond, you know, the taking of jobs, the devaluing of human creativity?
well, it's I've seen it referred to as the alignment problem, where the goals and objectives of the AI become different from those of its creators. So it we tell an AI, and an example I've heard from Ezra Klein, that we want it to make paper clips and give it, you know, control of the factory that makes paper clips, and then its mission is just to make paper clips, and it realizes that human beings have some certain amount of metal inside their bodies, and so it turns us all into paper clips. It turns the whole world into paper clips. I mean, obviously that's an exaggeration, but it's the type of thing that we and that engineers of AI are concerned about.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that example. Let's just have a response. I mean, what went wrong in that scenario? Was it literally just programming? Was there something else? I mean, is there other kinds of safeguards that we have to put in place as we think about how to use tools safely?
It does seem like two things come to mind. One is a little harkening back to some earlier things we were saying about the sort of blaming the technology. It reminds me of, you know, every time a new technology I mean, I think, was it Socrates who was worried about like written language, you know, like, oh my God, people are going to write things and then there will never be stories told. And then there was television and radio. And so there's that. And then, but I think what Laird is talking about, it sounds like there's a distinction between those. I mean, a book is not going to, you know, come and generate itself and, you know, take over the world. So if it sounds like AI has this potential that no other human created technology ever necessarily has had, if you accept the premise that it could kind of go rogue in this way. So it seems like there's that distinction that we're making, that this has some kind of potential that no other technology had. But what I'm hearing from you, Monica, is that that we still as humans may have the potential to put in place a bigger container or frame for this that's going to prevent that.
I mean, I think we have to, because again, even just in terms of like machinery, right? This kind of like automated machinery, we think of like factories where, you know, you have an assembly line and there are these machines that are doing these tasks. You know, if there's not an understanding of what this machine does, you know, accidents happen. I mean, and this is like on a completely non-AI level, you know, just on the tool level. So what I'm thinking is, you know, like, why would you need, for example, AI at a paperclip factory? You know, is that something, you know, what sort of safeguards do we need to have in place as humans when we think about our own tools?
I think accountability is a really important part. I think that, you know, there probably should not be situations coming up where something happens with an AI and it's kind of everyone standing around looking at each other. Like, I think that you know, there should probably be some sort of chain of responsibility. So you know, an AI could be, I think that people will act differently if you know, the AI is essentially doing actions that they will ultimately be held responsible for if it does something wrong, pretty much.
Yeah, I think that one of the fears that I've been seeing is that when something like this new technology is invented, it moves so quickly that it's hard to police. And this happened again. Sorry, my frame of reference is the postcard. Like the way the postcard kept changing, laws couldn't keep up with them. So, how do we have things in place where things keep evolving? And it seems like many times tech companies, don't ask for permission, they ask for forgiveness, right? What sort of thing can we have to create that accountability? I think that's a really important question.
Well, it really tries our faith in human beings, doesn't it? Mm. Obviously, we're coming to a place of realizing that some regulation is necessary, and what is our capability of creating that regulation? And then there's an additional fear of what people will do in the process of regulation, because God knows what kind of rules people will decide to make up in order to control things. And we just have not proven so far that we're very good at that. Yeah. But this could be the opportunity to get a lot better at it. And I think that more than an opportunity, we're right there.
Yeah. Which goes back to, I think it was Tatiana who talked about this idea of the invitation. And maybe the invitation is the valuing of the human, which includes things like the creation of accountability, because it seems like everything we're really afraid of is actually humans using these tools to have control over other humans, to the extent of something could go wrong and humans would be even more vulnerable, right? So if you give AI so much power, I think the only scenario I can think of is you are wanting to, I'm thinking of this capitalism, this late stage capitalism that Mutali was talking about. You want to remove the humans, make everything automated so you don't have to pay anybody. And that's when you get a situation where things could easily get out of control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I see a hand up from Rachel.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I just wanted to express an interest that I have in hearing about how people are working with AI currently, in their creative practices, and sort of what's working for people and maybe not working. And so that's one thing that I was really curious to hear about today. And since we're kind of approaching the last 20-ish minutes, I think I just wanted to put it out there that that's something I'm interested in. And I had an experience recently where I found out at grad school I wanted to go to their submissions. I had a month to apply, basically. And ChatGPT had just become on the scene in terms of popping up in my world as this accessible tool. And ChatGPT never could have written me an application that got me into this grad school. I was accepted. But as a dyslexic person and a creative person who struggles with certain aspects of writing, I don't think I could have pulled together an application in a month to have gotten into the school without that support. So my introduction to the tool in a very non-larger existential sense, very direct sense, was quite exhilarating and supportive. So I was just curious. That's there, whatever people want to talk about. I just wanted to express that curiosity that I have.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Because we, again, it's worked into our definition about being a tool, and we've looked at, some of the fears that we have around tools. But I think, seeing stories of positive and what you're saying about feeling, this was your application, but you felt that you were supported in that process, which, a lot of people have a lot of different kinds of support systems, and they're not all equal, especially when it comes to things like, university applications. So yeah, I would love to hear as we envision the tools for positive use in service of human creativity, in service of our definition of creativity as we've been formulating it.
Well, that's kind of what I focused my class on at the Writers Grotto, is helping writers to figure out how to use the tools. And I think the example that Rachel gave is a good one, that it as I understand what she did was use the a ChatGPT to create some content that she could then sort of sculpt to her needs. And what I've done in my use of it is sort of falls into two categories. One is brainstorming, and the other is research. The research, when I first came to it, I thought it wouldn't be useful for research because of the hallucination problem, but since then I've learned that there are ways to by using context and constraints that you can sort of focus it on a certain portion of data that you want analyzed, and avoid the risk of hallucination that you still need to do fact checking. And then for brainstorming, it's really good for like the example I gave of writing a lesson plan that I reacted against. You can ask it for suggestions for a plot twist in your novel, or background of a character, or dialogue. And again, I've never taken a whole cloth piece of text and put it into a creative work, but it often gives me the idea to do something else.
Yeah, I'm almost always, when I give a prompt to ChatGPT, I'm always asking for a list. What I'd like is, in that brainstorming, just have lots of options. And then based on the context and the overall picture of what I'm trying to do, I'll select one, or even if I don't select any, it helps, I think, sometimes in just, when you're dealing with words, sometimes they, in the moment they lose meaning. So you just need something to snap you out of it and to continue.
I was going to just add in, for me, it's been helpful in so many ways. I mentioned using it as a writing coach, but also in this sort of facing the blank page kind of idea, which I'm not usually blocked in my creative pursuits, but sometimes in very mundane ones. Like, I know, okay, I have to write this newsletter article. And because I love editing, I just need something on the page. So it's just great to say, give me something, and then I can work with it. And it's almost like having sort of a personal assistant who's like, oh, can you go write me a draft of this speech, and then I'll finesse it. So that in my life has been very, very helpful.
Well, and constraints are the word. I mean, you need to place constraints on GPT, and how you place constraints on it has tremendous effects on what it does for you. And just on the simplest level, you can ask GPT to take an interview, which, when people speak, they don't speak terribly eloquently, or they don't complete their sentences a lot of times. And so if you look at a transcript of an interview, you go like, oh my God, this makes everybody sound like idiots. Because it lacks the live experience of being there. But if you simply take that same interview and put it in ChatGPT and say to it, please punctuate the following text for clarity, readability, and excellent English grammar, and do not change anything else. It's astounding what really good punctuation can do. It's just amazing, actually. It completely transforms a piece of writing, and particularly, of course, this example of an interview, but it does that same thing to any writing that you put into it. I mean, give me a break. What an incredible assistance of the simplest possible thing to do to increase the readability and clarity of your text. And then the list goes on of similar, very mundane things that you can ask it to do. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear more about what people are doing in those practical ways.
This brings up for me one quick thing. I don't want to monopolize here. I'd love to hear from other people. Oh, Lisita has her hand up. Let's hear from Lisita before I jump back in.
Well, I would love to ask Mary Kate to read her comment. as well. So maybe she'll come in after me. But I wrote, as a child, learning how important spelling and grammar was inhibited my creative writing. Now ChatGPT takes the stress away from me, so I can use prompts like, don't add different words, just correct grammar and spelling. And maybe that will be helpful to other people who are using ChatGPT.
Yes, I was noticing Mary Kate's comment, and the only reason I was hesitating in reading it is because I think she's bringing up something that is one of those, another thing that might open up another whole realm where we could have another day-long discussion about it. So just to let people know, in case they didn't see it in the chat, she was talking about the her AI concerns being about the kind of censorship in a larger context, and saying perhaps the dilemma between my expectations and the conversation is that I'm an individual human who lives in a specific country where people are actively censoring creative products and spreading misinformation using technological tools, including AI. So I think that gets to that bigger picture that we were talking about before, where it's, what are the tools for and how are we using them as humans? Important to bring that out.
Yes.
So I'm going to say at this point, we've done so much amazing work together. We've talked about a meaningful definition of AI. We've talked about a meaningful definition of creativity, and we've kind of ended in answering our question: what does AI mean for the future of creativity? We've talked about this as an invitation. What it means is an invitation to value human creativity and to continue thinking through how human creativity can be optimized, can be heightened, can be valued more rather than devalued. And I want us to take just a little bit of time to hear from as many people as possible with just one thought. What is something from our dialogue today that you want to keep thinking about, whether it's a question, whether it's a comment that you heard from somebody else? I'd love to just spend the next 5 minutes. We'll just leave maybe 5 minutes at the end. Let's just hear from as many people as possible saying one thing that they're taking with them to continue thinking about from today.
I have one really quick one. One project that we're working on with a university partner is the definition of beauty. And we're looking at AI generated pictures and what it means to be beautiful. So coming out of this, I'm very inspired to take back just even this collaborative conversation technique, Monica, because we all have very different ideas.
What else are people taking with them?
I think for me, it's how can I continue to participate in the dialogue and even introduce just participatory community engagement around AI. So part of what I do sometimes is healing circles, racial healing circles. And I know they talk a lot about the biases in AI and just being able to invite especially people who don't feel like they're connected to that space and are really into the AI, but how do we have circles for them? Because they're the ones who are building the systems, and having such a huge role in that, but they're not connected again with the people who are actually actively dialoguing about these things. And how can I kind of bridge the two?
Tatiana, I love that. I love that. And so much of what we have done tonight is not getting into that kind of binary thinking and not allowing ourselves to do the things that, we're afraid of. That's amazing. Wonderful. Who else? What are you taking with you?
I'm just having these visions as people speak of kind of massive community participation and discussion. It seems, I'm just hearing this and I'm feeling that's actually what's necessary in this situation. Yeah.
And also question, how do we do that? So I think in Tatia's point, and I'm thinking of that too, like it's yes and how. Yes, good.
I see a series in my future. No, literally. I mean, it's very interesting. This is how ideas come to me. I mean, I thought, okay, this is an interesting, and then because I too am having this impulse of continuing the conversation, continuing, and so I'm thinking, I wonder how I could make that happen. So I don't know what form that will take yet, but I want to be part of that.
Great.
I'm thinking about some of the points that Mutale made about, Aryans being the original forum participants on the internet, and how most of the data that the generative models have assimilated was created by white men, and how do we as individuals using these tools avoid having our speech and our ideas transformed by these models into so sort of being narrowed down into that universe of ideas and ways of expression. Like even the idea of correcting your grammar or making yourself more articulate. Are we sort of if you are somebody who speaks with a regional or ethnic aspect that's different from what we call standard English, how do you use this tool in a way that doesn't transform you into speaking like that, those people who controlled the internet for so long?
Very quickly, Google are on that quest and that journey right now. I was with them last week, and it's exciting. And I'm obviously someone that leads AI for the people. I'm not a tech optimist, but I am an optimistic person. And I do work with technology, and it's exciting to think about how they're opening up what knowledge could look like. It's not open source, so I'm not happy about that, but it's a great journey I think they're on.
So what would I search exactly?
The new thing is called Project Elevate Black Voices, and they are creating language models they're creating voice assistants that will be able to understand regional dialect, and they're going through to like African language and others. But because they have a research partnership at Howard University, they've started out with African American vernacular English, and very quickly found out that African American vernacular English is regional. So they went in thinking basically all Black people spoke the same, and then we're there for about 15 minutes. Then we're like, wait, if I'm in Alabama, to Monica's point earlier, cultural nuances are coming in that are not found in New York City, where I am, for example.
That sounds fascinating.
Anyone else want to share what they're going to continue thinking about one thing? What are they taking with them from today's dialogue? These are also amazing. I mean, I'm going to continue also taking what you're taking, by the way, just saying that.
I thought I'd just jump in because I think it pertains to what was just spoken about, which is really fascinated by this thing of accessibility and gatekeeping. And so it's like on one hand, AI tools helped me as a dyslexic person get into a university that might have historically been gatekept from me. And maybe other people who are discriminated against for various different dialects and, whatever, could use it the same way. But then also the tool then also makes everyone's voice sound the same. And, that takes away from humanity, right? So like, I'm going to definitely keep thinking about that, the ways that it plays back and forth, and is very interesting.
Oh, that's fantastic. It, can level the playing field, but we can also flatten things, flatten our experience. Yeah.
I'm not able to raise my hand for some reason, but
what's your name?
Barbara. Sorry.
Oh.
I'm gonna take away. I'm in a lot of communities that are very, very fearful and rageful about AI, and so I'm going to take away some of the references I've gotten here of people of color and labor issues and other things that are actually being explored. So the conversation isn't so one-sided that like it's all tech bros, when I think there are a lot of people working on these issues.
Barbara, if I can call you that, don't worry. I feel like all of this activated Black feminists across the world, and we were all like, wait, hold up. We're not going down like this. So and we're recruiting, so feel free to join us.
Oh, cool. I connected with you so on LinkedIn, so I sent you an invite.
Happening. It's happening. Our dreams are happening.
I know.
All right. So yeah, I think we'll wrap up now. Go ahead, Audrey. Over to you.
Well, I'm getting shivers because I cannot tell all of you how this, I prepared myself, prepare for the worst, or no, whatever it is. I thought, okay, well, this could all go totally south, but it all went totally north. I mean, this was just amazing. So I really have to thank everybody here, from our panelists, Shuffle, all the people who attended and had such wonderful things to contribute. Just really, I feel just blessed to be part of this, and thanks again. I'm going to put the links that I promised in the chat, so let me just do that really quick. And we also have, there's an opportunity to give us a little support. You may have noticed, I think some of you, we changed things a little through the registration process, but there was at some point when you registered or replied to this, the ability to give us a little donation to offset some of the costs that we had putting this together. So if you missed that, I think that Tess has that. I don't have the link to that. And if not,
yes, I'll stick it in.
Okay, great. That would be fabulous. So I really do hope that somehow we are able to continue this conversation. Maybe it becomes a series, maybe, who knows? I don't know. My creative wheels are already turning. So that's where I'm going with this wonderful experience and event. So thanks again. And I'm going to wrap up. We will stop the recording, and I'm happy to hang out after the recording for anybody who might want to do that and chat in a little more informal way for a few minutes.